Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
I am well, Rory. Thank you for asking. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you for joining us as a listener. You've joined us at episode 178 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We've got 3 sections we're going to be digging into today. The first being our student check-in, where we take something that students may come across during their studies, and we're going to be speaking about integrative or eclectic counselling. What is the difference? So we're going to be digging into that one. Then we're going to be moving on to the digital counselling revolution, where we recognize that technology is now used in how therapy is delivered and consumed by our clients. And we're going to be speaking about online counselling relating to geographical considerations. And that's an interesting one. I think you're going to like that. And we're going to end episode 178 by going into practice matters, where we take something that we may come across within the day-to-day practice of being a counsellor, and we're going to be speaking about models of mental health. What are they? What should we be looking out for within our therapy rooms? So let's start off with that student check-in. Integrative or eclectic counselling. Is there really a difference, Rory?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and it's a question that was asked in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, you are missing out. Go to Facebook, type it in. You'll type in Counselling Tutor. You'll find us. We're a closed group. Knock on the door. Of course, we're going to let you in. We're a friendly bunch, and there are thousands and thousands of like-minded individuals studying, practicing and supervising and teaching in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And this question was asked, and I think I'm going to start off answering this with a quote from the BACP about different models of therapy. And they say, this is when several distinct models of counselling and psychotherapy are used together in a converging way rather than separate approaches. And I think that sets us off quite nicely with what integrative therapy is. Integrative is where you integrate one or more approach into your practice. So a lot of people start off learning person-centered therapy, and then they go and they may practice, they may learn, say, CBT as a postgraduate qualification, and they may join them together. And here's the thing, Ken, it's how you join the two approaches together that give you the difference between integrative and eclectic. And I think that that is a good way of thinking about it. I have to say, it's a cause of huge debate within the psychotherapeutic profession. But my view is that if you integrate your therapy, you're really like cooking a meal. You're putting the ingredients together, and you shouldn't really, the client shouldn't really know that you're practicing 2 different therapies. So maybe if you're working with a client with anxiety and you're trained in CBT and person-centered, you would use the necessary and sufficient conditions to form the therapeutic relationship and hear the client's story. And then what you may do is then you may add elements of CBT into your work, so like giving homework or checking thought patterns to help the client kind of reassess where they are. That would be an integrative approach. Eclectic is a little bit like a pick and mix. So you could have something called technical eclecticism, where effectively what you are doing is you are using 2 approaches and blending them together. But what can happen, and if we're not careful, is it's a bit like serving up a meal just with the raw vegetables. So I always used to say when I was teaching, you know, if you think of tomato soup, it's not just tomato that goes in, it's a whole load of ingredients, but it actually produces a tomato soup. That would be integrative, an integrative way of cooking. An eclectic way of cooking could be seen as just serving up the raw materials. So in other words, we're going to try some CBT today. We're going to try some TA today. We might try some existentialism. And the difficulty is that if it's done without thought, the client may find themselves not knowing what they're doing.
Yeah. Feeling confused, feeling conflicted with what may turn out to be the conflicts in the different techniques or the different modalities that are coming together if working in an eclectic way. And I really enjoy the cooking analogy on this one. You know, when you're talking about cooking, generally you're going to be working to a recipe, and a recipe is something that has been worked out, it's been tested, and it has a reason for being. You can take those same ingredients, let's take the tomato soup ingredients, the garlic, the onions, the tomatoes, maybe some stock, maybe some salt, and if they're just thrown in willy-nilly without having measured measurements to those ingredients, it may come out tasting quite bad, Rory. And it can be exactly the same ingredients, just in different quantities, to working to a recipe where you know that they're going to balance one another off. So on our website, counsellingtutor.com, we have got hundreds and hundreds of different articles on counselling, psychotherapy for students. If you're studying, we've got a little bit of a search function on that site. You can go in and put in the topic you're studying. I went in this morning and I put in integrative counselling just to have a look at what came up there. And there's something really useful on the website where it kind of breaks it down into points. So it suggests that eclectic psychotherapy, it uses different techniques in an ad hoc way, like having a toolbox of therapeutic techniques to draw on when needed. Now, that's not good and it's not bad. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative. Eclectic psychotherapy does not concern itself with theoretical conflicts between the modalities. And eclectic psychotherapy does not incorporate modalities into a new model. Now, when we're talking about the tomato soup, the tomatoes, the garlic, the salt, the stock, whatever, the basil maybe that you're putting into that, they're all separate ingredients. But when they come together, you don't serve it up as tomato and garlic and stock and basil soup. It becomes a new thing. It becomes tomato soup. And on the site, counsellingtutor.com, integrative counselling involves a blending of theory and practice, individualized and tailored to the client and their presentation, and it considers the similarities and the difference between the relevant models when developing an approach. And you spoke about the study, Rory, and it may well be you go and you get a base qualification, a degree, maybe your base modality is person-centered. If you then go and study transactional analysis, and then you do a course on cognitive behavioral therapy, and then you go and do another course on Gestalt, you're going to have so much that you can draw on to maybe be there with a client in the way that they need you to be. But that does not make an integrative counselor. That is more eclectic, where you're drawing on different modalities and tools to be able to service a client. Integrative counseling is specialist training, and you will be trained how to blend the modalities.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this comes with practice. You know, everything we do in the world of counselling and psychotherapy is down to practice. Yes, we can, you know, and we've used the analogy of cooking today, and I think this is a great analogy because, you know, anybody can buy the ingredients, but actually making a palatable food is a different discipline altogether, and it usually comes with experience and reflection. And I think there are some dangers of being eclectic. So, you know, in terms of just picking and choosing modalities, it could be seen as a pick and mix approach. You know, you say, oh, we'll try this, we'll try that. It does dilute the theory. You know, as a therapist, you have to have faith in the theory that you're using. And I think that what can happen is that sometimes therapists lose faith in the theory, and out of desperation, they try another approach. And it can also be a lack of faith in themselves. I think if people start doing this pick and mix approach, sometimes it may be that they've lost faith in their own ability to be a counsellor, and they're just trying everything. And I also think that you have to be very, very, very careful, because some theories are based in different ideas. So person-centered therapy is based in phenomenology, people's perception and the way they view the world. CBT is really based on how people think and how their thoughts may not be accurate. And I think that those two could clash if they're not delivered in a very, very, very thoughtful way. And sometimes I think I've heard stories, certainly from students that I've taught, who've had what I would call pick and mix therapy, where it became increasingly apparent that the therapist was getting a bit desperate. This isn't working. You're not feeling better today. We'll try this. I think that if you're blending any two theories together, you have to have faith in them, and you have to have faith in the client. It's the client that's doing the work. And sometimes it doesn't matter how many theories you've got available to you. Sometimes there are other reasons why clients don't progress or don't, heal themselves. And that is down to client factors. They're not motivated enough. They're not ready. They're not in a place where they can use the therapy to help themselves.
Definitely. It's interesting. It's a great topic. I think, going back to studying and maybe having this kind of a question in an assignment, often in assignments we're called upon not just to describe maybe the difference between different theories and how that works and the main concepts of the modality. We're often called on to critique the modality that we're looking at. And I think that you've covered some really good points there, Rory, that would be great in assignments. And again, counsellingtutor.com. If you're interested in this, just go on the website and put in integrative as a search, and the article's going to come up there for you. And some of the main criticisms that are kind of in the article it suggest a therapist using a mixture of modalities can be confusing to the client, as you've already said, Rory. In working with so many different modalities, another critique, the therapist may not develop sufficient depth in any one of them. Concerns about an integrative therapist becoming a jack of all trades, a master of none. I just want to put out here, before we start getting letters in the mail back, there's not Rory and I or our opinion. These are just kind of some thoughts for you to debate and think of yourself. We're not saying that at all. Therapists, unconscious motivation for selecting a modality that maybe fits best for them. An integrative therapist who is maybe drawn in the direction of a certain modality, even subconsciously, because it fits better for them, or this is the one that most works because of their experience in their own journey, I guess. And then a purist person-centered therapist may suggest, as you have just now, Rory, that a non-directive modality cannot be paired in with any directive approach because it kind of stops being a person-centered modality. So there's some critiques of the integrative model just to consider there.
Yes, and it does have some advantages, of course. We've talked about the criticisms, but the advantages, of course, is the client has access to a wider range of approaches. And so if a therapist has lots of what we sometimes refer to as tools in the toolbox, you can negotiate with the client to what they need, and you can use the approach that best suits their desires. And we're all in service of the client. And I think that leads on to the kind of new thinking within psychotherapeutic circles, which is pluralism, where you're using exactly what the client wants. The client's coming in and saying, "This is what I want," and you work with the client with what they want. So, like a lot of things in counselling and psychotherapy, there's no right or wrong answer. It lives, I think, in the application and in the thoughtfulness of the practitioner.
Indeed. And we have got a free handout for you on integrative approaches. It's the advantages and disadvantages of integrative approaches. And you can get that free from today's podcast by visiting the show notes page. Where you will find that is go to our main website, which is counsellingtutor.com. In the top menu, click on the podcasts tab and select episode 178. That's today's episode 178. On that page, all of the show notes from today's episode with any relevant links, and of course that free download right there, one of Rory's super duper handy downloads that you can download, print out, have on file if you ever need to reference this in the future. So there it is. That is our student check-in. And we now move on to the digital counselling revolution, where we recognise the use of technology both in delivery and how therapy is consumed. And today we're going to be diving into online therapy, geographical considerations.
Digital Counselling Revolution.
Yes, one of the things that online therapists are beginning to understand and realize is that they're not just located in their local area. How many times have I received phone calls in my practice from someone maybe in Birmingham or in London or in a different part of the country who wanted to see me, and I've said, well, I live in Manchester, on the outskirts of Manchester, and really, I wouldn't travel to see someone, and they've said, oh, thank you very much, I'll find someone locally to me. I think that online therapy has brought a realization to a lot of therapists that actually you can work anywhere in the UK. If you're working in the UK, you're working with a client and they decide to move to, say, another part of the country, you can still work with them. And we've all had, I think, clients who've been working really hard in therapy, and then because of personal issues, they've had to move. Maybe they've had to move back to relatives or move with their job. And, I've certainly had clients who said to me, I wish I could continue, but I have to move, and the distance is too great. I can't travel to see you. Now, of course, with online therapy, that isn't an issue. Wherever somebody moves to, certainly within the UK, you can still work with them. And the same goes for if the therapist decides that they want to move home and move somewhere else in the UK. Maybe you want to move, nearer the sea or something like that. You can still see your clients online, because the only room that you have is a virtual room.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. I think it also lends itself to when a therapist may take a break. If you as a therapist take a break, traditionally and when I mean a break, I mean maybe go away on holiday. Traditionally, you would need to break contact with your clients, and there are some times that we're working with clients that may really need support over those times, but we're not able to physically be there because we're away. Well, using either telephone or online work, if needs must, we are able to be there and potentially continue therapy. Of course, we wouldn't be able to speak about geographical boundaries without putting in the disclaimer and the warning. There is this thought of, I'm a therapist, I am in private practice. Traditionally, you're going to be working with people within your town, within your surroundings, maybe 5 miles, maybe 10 miles that somebody might drive to come to your practice if you're working face-to-face. Whereas, of course, those boundaries are broken down. If you're working online, you can work with somebody at the other side of the country. However, as soon as you go outside of the country, that is where the warning comes in. We need to consider that there are different laws in different countries. And we need to think about how we are working, and that needs to be very clearly contracted. So it's not to say that you cannot work outside of your geographic boundaries, outside of your own country. You can, but it does take serious consideration from a legal perspective to make sure that you are working within the laws of the country that the client is joining you from. But then there are certain questions that come up, and one of those questions may be, okay, well, I'm working with my client online. My client is a UK resident, but my client is going to be visiting another country on work or on a vacation. Can I continue to work with them?
Well, I think that is a very, very interesting observation, Ken. And I'll make two responses to that. The first is, if you're seeing a face-to-face client, and they say, I'm going on vacation, I'm taking a break, usually they go. If a client would, in a face-to-face environment, client says, can I contact you on holiday? Therapists would have to be very, very, very thoughtful about client dependency, about if a client can be autonomous, because autonomy is probably the lead ethical thinking that we have as therapists. And I think it's interesting. There is a growing trend that I've picked up that clients have therapy while they're on holiday or on vacation. Now, I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing, but I do think it is a new kind of process that online therapy has brought. and one that needs a lot of thinking about. As I said, usually when clients go on holiday, you see them in 2 weeks. They come back and you see them again. The other aspect, of course, is if you're working internationally, what are the laws in the different countries that you're working in? Can you call yourself a psychotherapist in France if you're a psychotherapist in the UK? And the answer to that question, I'm told, is no, because because in France, it's a protected title. So you can call yourself a counsellor or mental health support worker, but you can't call yourself a psychotherapist. And of course, if you go to America, they're licensed state by state. So I was talking to some colleagues who were practicing in the States, and they were saying that they can't work outside their states.
Yeah.
Someone in California couldn't work with someone in Arizona because each state has their own distinct licensing. And of course, as we always say, you need to check with your insurance company before you decide to work geographically. What does your insurance company think of it? Do they have any limitations? It is a product of a rather kind of Wild West thinking. It is so new and online and telephone therapy in terms of its scale. It's been around for a long time, but in terms of its scale, I think in some cases we're learning as we're going. And international working, I think, is one where people are learning on the job, because we never had to consider these things before online came. When people came in our rooms to do therapy, to receive therapy, they were in one location. So if you're thinking of working out of country, geographically as we'll call it, I think you need to do a lot of due diligence before you commit to it.
Yes. Yeah, know what you're getting into. And I think really good points there, Rory, in terms of checking with your insurer, not just that you've checked the legalities of that you check with your insurer. If something should go wrong, are you going to be covered? And the same thing goes for check with whoever your ethical body is. If you've chosen an ethical body, no doubt you will be working to a framework, an ethical framework. What does your ethical framework suggest? And I'm thinking particularly in service of the clients, because an ethical body is going to provide a complaints procedure for a client. If a client feels that they have been mistreated in some way, they have an open and clear procedure that they can follow to lay a complaint. And so they should have. Does that apply if they are not in the same country? So as we've said, geographical boundaries, yes, they come smashing down. If you're going outside of your country, there are additional considerations that need to be looked into really, really carefully. But coming back into your own country, so we're now working within the geography of our own country, there are still other considerations, and considerations like onward referrals. So if you are working with a client, that client is in the same country as you, but many hundreds of miles away, just using an example here, and you need to make a referral, do you have that referral network? Are you able to make that referral? If that person suggests that they may be in a domestic abusive relationship, do you have the information on tap for them to key into their local area? So generally, as therapists, again, as face-to-face workers, we would collect our referral pathways and networks around us, and generally they're going to be in the town that you practice in, because that's where your clients would be coming to see you from, and you would be referring them to services within your town. But as soon as you're working with somebody in their town or city, are you able to make those referrals? And keeping in mind, sometimes a referral may be unseen. It can come up in session 6. A client can say something that would indicate a referral could be made here. Are you able to make that there and then? It's worth having a think about. And in our course, we run a course at Counselling Tutor, online and telephone counselling certificate course, and within the course, one of the exercises that our students do is to create a national referral database where they'll go through and think about what referrals they may need to make, and consider, can they be made that they can be accessed online? and the referrals can be national rather than town-based. So they are the considerations. So much to think about when working online via telephone, changing all the time. If you think about it, at the time of making this recording, we are coming towards the end of January in 2021 here in the UK, because that's where Rory and I are based. And only just weeks ago, the United Kingdom left the European Union. And that, of course, changed the way we deliver. It changed some of the laws. As opposed to being inclusive in the European Union, we are now separate from. It's created a lot of challenges and difference for many people, many businesses, and therapists are not excluded from this. And this is why continuing professional development, understanding, being really competent in what it is and how we deliver that is so important. And of course, if you're interested in the course that is run by Counselling Tutor, over 10,000 therapists to date have taken that course. You're more than welcome to take a look at that. You can get information on it at counsellingtutor.com. We've made the course affordable, and it is open to anyone who is a qualified therapist working face-to-face, or even if you are working online and you want to sharpen your competence, it is open to you. And it is also open to a student of counselling who is working towards or already in placement, to allow students at difficult times to work remotely with their clients. Counsellingtutor.com, that's where that information is.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And just one final thing on that. We talk about working geographically, but actually, even within the United Kingdom, the laws, there is a law that's different in England than it is in Scotland. And that, of course, is working with people who've been adopted in England. If you had been adopted and you want to talk specifically about adoption issues, under the 2010 legislation, you have to find a Ofsted registered counsellor. It's not the same in Scotland. So you could have a paradoxical situation where a client in England decides to talk about their adoption and works with a therapist in Scotland where the law doesn't apply.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
It is an interesting one, and it's really worth looking into, and it's something that maybe is not considered. And to be honest, Rory, before I heard about that, I would not have considered it. If somebody had, a client had presented and suggested they were adopted, I wouldn't even have considered it because I was ignorant of what needed to be done. And it's just that light shining on how we need to be doing CPD all the time. It's all, and if you're interested in more on the law of adoption and counselling, you can get information on that from episode 58 of the Counselling Tutor podcast. We go into some detail in that, and to find that, go to counsellingtutor.com podcast tab and just find yourself episode 58, or just go to Counselling Tutor and put in the word adoption as a search, and it will bring that up, and we go into some depth there. But so much to consider as we kind of make our way out of digital counselling revolution, and we make our way into practice matters, where we look at something we're likely to come across within the day-to-day workings of being a counsellor. And today we're going to be looking at models of mental health.
Practice matters.
Well, it's been a very, very interesting week in the world of mental health. And for those of you who've been paying attention to the news outside COVID, you've probably heard that there is considerations that the Mental Health Act is going to be altered. There's a proposal that people who are being sectioned under the Mental Health Act can be represented by relatives, this is quite a new idea. And it goes a lot deeper to that, because over the years, there's been a changing attitude to mental health. Many years ago, when I was teaching, I remember touching on models of mental health. And I said to my students, everybody has mental health. And one of my students was quite amazed at that. She didn't actually realize that everybody has mental well-being, like we would have physical well-being. And the fact of the matter is, everybody has mental health. Some people get up in the morning and feel a little blue, and or get up in the morning and feel really excited and happy. Sometimes people can get just don't want to get up in the morning, and it is a linear scale, from the very, very, very well to the very unwell. And, sometimes we find ourselves up and down that scale. And it does bring to mind that there are different models of mental health. And I think it's really, really useful that students understand that they when they're working with clients, the clients may come into contact with other services that have a different view on mental health. And a good example of that is you may have a client who is taking antidepressants. That would be in the medical model of mental health. So the medical model would be offering medication. There may be a belief that there's a predisposition to someone having a mental health issue. It could be to do with genetics or neuroscience. And that is seen as what's called a medical model. And that is how patients who go to a doctor could be seen. I think that a lot of doctors, a lot of the medical profession now have got a wider view of what mental health is, but traditionally it was medication, take this. And that does happen. People still go to GPs, I feel a bit down, and they're still offered antidepressants. Nowadays, in a more enlightened time, people are offered counselling as well, which is offering a psychological model. You see where I'm going here? You got a medical model, which is medication, and a psychological model, which is learning coping skills, thinking about emotions, thinking about your attitudes to the world, your belief system. And sometimes those two models can work quite nicely. You might have someone who's got high anxiety, who's given medication to reduce that, and they then go on to have therapy, which is equally as helpful. But there's one more model of mental health that sometimes isn't really thought about, and that's called the social model. And that is really where people exist in our society, and that is things like family support, financial things. Can someone pay their bills? Are they living in housing that is suitable for their needs? Cultural and traditions. Can people practice their faith and practice their culture? Things like friends, family, and the environments. And these three models, they overlap in a sort of a Venn diagram, and it gives us really a sense of what mental health is. It doesn't fit into either one or the other. It's not the medical model, not the psychological model or the social model. They all overlap, and I think for good mental health, you need aspects of all of them. You need to be thoughtful, and if you are in a situation where you're feeling really, really down or really, really stressed, therapy may help. But I know from experience of friends that also sometimes medication can help.
No, definitely. And I think that if we're speaking about the different models of mental health, what we're suggesting here is when someone has challenges with their mental health, what are the factors that can contribute to where that person is coming from? And I always think that a great place to start is with a definition. And the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So that kind of gives us a little package of what that definition is. When a person is unable to function in some of those areas, it's then about looking at what can be the contributing factors. And Rory, you've spoken about the different models, the different places that we would look for that. Also for treatment. So if we're talking about medical model, we may be treating or using some kind of medical treatment for that. And one of the areas that is interesting is the faith model. It is also a model of mental health. And it could be that a person has a certain faith or a certain following that they are having a struggle with. And this struggle can really impact their mental health. It can impact who they are and how they function in life. There could be a feeling that they have maybe fallen out of favor with their God, or even been abandoned by their God or higher power, whatever they choose that to be. They could be showing having an issue with the moral code of feeling they fall short of following what is required in their faith, or they could be shunned from other members of their faith because they're not seen to be following their faith. And all of those have an impact in who that person is, their well-being, their ability to live a full and meaningful life. And we may see that presenting as therapists, and there's a lot to consider. We need to look at potentially what their faith is. We need to look at their living conditions, their psychological conditions. There's so much to take into their biosocial conditions, so much that overlaps, that creates those models of mental health.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think you struck on a really interesting point there, is that different people have different scaffolding to support their mental health. So it could be that of faith. It could be that they take medication. It could be that they get involved in outside activities and they do something like, I ride a bike and that makes me feel better. I go for a walk. And I think we have to be very, very thoughtful as therapists that we don't knock the scaffolding poles away from a person's mental health support they put in. And I've worked with a number of clients who've gone through 12-step recovery programs. And one of the things you have to be super careful about is not to collide with the scaffolding that is supporting them. So you need to tread carefully when you're working with any client. You need to, tread very, very carefully. But you need to be really attuned to what support systems are working for them in a healthy way, and making sure that, you reinforce that. If it's working for them, if it's a healthy support system, that, you say, this is great. You go for a walk and you're feeling better, and helping them and reinforcing the things that they're doing already, and not sort of dismissing them or discounting them. What I'd like people to do is I'd like people to, when they hear this podcast, to go to our webpage, counsellingtutor.com, find the podcast tab, go to podcast 178, and I'm going to post a website called A New Vision for Mental Health. And they say new and interesting things are happening in mental health care. Find out about them and help shape a new vision for mental health. Be under no illusion, the field of mental health and how we're seeing mental and emotional distress is changing. It is a new vision, and it's not just in this website, it's across, in the UK National Health Service. Get yourself informed about it, because we're changing. We're becoming a more, and we started with eclectic at the beginning of the podcast. We're becoming a more eclectic view of what constitutes mental health and what constitutes good mental health.
Yeah, I think so. And it's realizing that what we offer as counselors, as psychotherapists, is not always the only answer, the only solution. It's the old adage of if your only tool is a hammer, you will see all life's problems as nails. And I don't know if you've ever tried hammering in a screw into wood. You kind of get it there, but it damages the wood, and it is less effective than using the correct tool. And when we're talking about the models of mental health, it's about us being able to make appropriate referrals. I think, Rory, the website that you're sharing on the show notes page is a great place to start. It's a great place for us as therapists to stay informed of what's going on, to realize that there are other reasons that would cause a person to present to us as counselors. It's not always going to be psychological. I guess as counselors, we mostly work within what is called the psychological model of mental health. That would be psychoanalysis, transaction analysis, person-centered counseling, cognitive behavioral counseling, art therapy, narrative therapy, solution-focused therapy. This is all sits within that psychological model, and it is very effective in what we do. The research and the evidence clearly shows that, but there are other reasons why people may come in. Within our psychological model, we generally see the person's presentation as resulting from maybe faulty thinking, unresolved issues from childhood, maybe introjected values that they may be working from. That's what we see it from. But we need to be able to see further than that. We need to be able to see the other models of mental health. If a person is clinically depressed, they have a chemical imbalance within their brain, then it is a different model that they may need to support that. It doesn't mean that the psychological model would not be effective in working alongside that, but we need to understand the different models of mental health to be able to make the correct referrals and work holistically with our clients. Client presenting that has nowhere to live and has dire money issues and is not able to put food in their cupboards. Yes, we can work with them with the emotions that surround that. However, though, their psychosocial model, the psychosocial model of who they are is failing them. And no matter how much we work on being there and saying, I understand that, and that must be really difficult for you, there is another aspect of their life that needs attention. And as professionals in a person's journey, maybe somebody would come to us and we would be able to pick that up and make the appropriate referrals.
Absolutely, Ken. And before the post bag fills up, there are those who say that actually mental health isn't a chemical imbalance. And that is a debate that's a debate that's a live debate. If you do the research, you'll see there are forces on one side that say it's not a chemical imbalance, there's no evidence of a chemical imbalance, and you'll see forces on the other side that says it is a chemical imbalance. I think the point here is that we are now understanding that mental health is a mixed economy. It doesn't just rely on therapy. It doesn't just rely on medication if that's necessary, and it doesn't just rely on having a way of living that's conducive to good mental well-being. It may be a mixed economy, and we're beginning to grasp that. A lot of doctors now, certainly GPs I know, are curious about how people are living. They may even signpost them to benefits. I know from relatives that I've had that have been in difficulties with their mental health, the doctors were brilliant in saying, certainly here in the UK where we have a kind of social benefit system, saying, well, look, it seems that money worries is a problem, but actually, did you know you can claim this? Did you know you can get that? And that is just such a relief. Now that same person could go to therapy and talk about the fact that they can't feed themselves, and no amount of therapy is going to make their hungry tummies any less hungry.
Yeah.
So I think the point I'm coming to, it's a mixed economy, and as therapists, we are a part of that mixed economy. We always have to be open-minded.
I like that. I like mixed economy. It's an ecosystem, isn't it?
It is.
And it's an ecosystem that remains in balance from the different services. Now, if you're interested in more information on models of mental health, 3 things you can do. Number 1, as Rory's already said, go to our website, counsellingtutor.com. All the information on there is free. Go to the podcast tab, go to episode 178. Rory will put that link within the show notes today. Also, on counsellingtutor.com. If you do a search, just use our search bar and put in models of mental health or even just mental health. We've got a great article on the different models of mental health. And if you want to take that a little further, we do have a paid for service called our Counsellor CPD Library. It's for qualified practitioners who choose to sharpen their competence. And within our CPD library, we have got a lecture on the different models of mental health. It's almost an hour-long lecture, really going into the different models so that we can have an understanding. And if you're interested in joining our CPD library, it is a really affordable price that we've made that available for. You can get that from counsellingtutor.com. The homepage has got the information on for you.
Yes, well, it's been an eclectic mix of topics today, as it always is on the Counselling Tutor podcast. In fact, we actually did start off with integrative or eclectic counselling. We moved on to looking at geographical considerations, the benefits of working online and the new horizons that are opening up. And we finally finished on models of mental health, the mixed economy that all of us as therapists work in. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and join the digital counselling revolution.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.